Hey guys, in this video what we're going to do is we're going to set up our development environment. Now this is going to be composed of three major things. First of all, we're going to need the Java Development Kit. Now the Java Development Kit is provided to us by Oracle, and it gives us a Java runtime as well as the tools for compiling Java code. In addition to the JDK, we're going to need Android Studio. Now, Android Studio is the newly released official IDE for working with Android. In the early days of Android, or, well, as of like a year ago, Google recommended that we used Eclipse, the Java IDE Eclipse, using their official plugins in order to develop Android applications. Well, Eclipse is growing a little dated, to be honest. I know there are a lot of people who still like it and use it every day, but Google decided to go with a more modern Java IDE. So what they did was they forked the IDE from JetBrains, IntelliJ, and created Android Studio out of it. And Android Studio provides you all the tools that you need to build Android applications. So that's where we're going to be writing all of our code. If you're familiar at all with JetBrains' IntelliJ, you'll be right at home with Android Studio. It's a very, very nice package, and it was recently released to the stable version, to the stable channel, which, well, basically means let's go use that now. So all new Android development should be done using Android Studio. Now, after we install Android Studio, we'll still need a way to emulate or virtualize an Android device on our computer, in case you don't have an Android device handy to work with. Even if you do, I highly recommend people use a virtualized or emulated environment to test and debug their Android applications. It's just significantly easier to work with when you have your Android screen on your computer as opposed to being, on your desk or whatever. Now, for some things you will need a physical device for if you want to do something with a camera or something like that, but using a virtualized or emulated Android device on your computer is very, very handy. It also allows us to spool up more than one instance, because throughout this course we're going to be talking about some level of networking, which will require us to have two Android instances side by side. Now the Android SDK, being the component that comes with Android Studio that allows us to create Android applications, provides you with what are called Android emulators. And they're Android emulators in the sense of the word emulator. Now, if you're not familiar with how Android works on devices, Android is designed to run on the ARM CPU architecture, the ARM architecture, which you find in almost every single smartphone on the planet and tablet on the planet. Now, the ARM architecture is not compatible with the x86 architecture that you find on your PC, or Mac for that matter. What that means is that this emulator, what it does is it actually translates instructions in software between their ARM instructions to their corresponding x86 instructions. Now, unfortunately, that's very excruciatingly, miserably slow. The Android emulator is not fun to work with. The feedback loop is like 10 million years to go from compile to press a button on the screen. Now, there's a way around that slightly using what are called the Intel Haxim drivers, which actually do give you an x86 virtualized environment, but unfortunately on Windows, they're very buggy. I ran into an inordinate amount of rendering bugs on my own machine when I was using them. So unfortunately, Google doesn't yet provide officially for Windows a suitable development emulator or virtualized Android device. So what happened was other companies kind of picked up the slack and started working on their own. One of those companies is Genymotion. Now what they did was they're basically a wrapper over the software product called VirtualBox. If you're familiar with virtualization, VirtualBox is a free open source virtualization platform. And what they did was they wrapped around VirtualBox, and then they distribute images of Android that are compiled to run on x86, and then VirtualBox virtualizes an x86 environment. You plop your image on that and blah, blah, blah. It just works, and it's super fast and super awesome. That's the one we're going to be using. So what I mean, so basically it all boils down to we're going to be using Genymotion to give us virtualized Android instances that run very, very well on our x86 platform. I do want to point out a side note. Microsoft is working on an Android virtualized device, and I'm really excited to see how that pans out. But unfortunately, it's not suitable yet for production use.
And right now, Genymotion does have a free version for them to learn on, don't they?
Yeah. That's actually thanks for yeah. So Genymotion is a paid application as well as a free application. Now the free application is just fine for development. All the features you need for development you will have, just with a little watermark that says for personal use only. So I recommend go ahead and do that. If you don't want to use Genymotion for any reason, your second best option is to use the Intel Haxen drivers. But if you're on Windows, they will be buggy. So basically, we have three things to install. We have the JDK, so we can compile Java code. We have the Android Studio, so that we can write Java code for Android. And we have Genymotion, so we can run an instance of Android. And a final thing that we also need, but it happens to be included with Android Studio, is we need the Android SDK in order to have all the libraries and other additional compilers and packagers and fun stuff like that that we need to actually deploy and debug Android code with. So let's go ahead and get started. What you're looking at is a completely 100% clean installation of Windows 8.1. I have none of the software installed, so you guys will see the complete process of installing this. So let's go ahead and start off with installing the JDK. So I'm going to open up Chrome here. And over here, I'm going to search Google for, well, JDK. I'm just going to type that in. And the first result we're going to see under here on these little links, what we want is we want the JDK 7. So Android doesn't yet support Java 8. So we're going to download the JDK 7, not the JDK 8. So let's go ahead and click on that. And end of public updates, blah, blah, blah. Now, where did that run down to? Okay, so scroll down for the Java SE Development Kit 7U75. Go ahead and accept the license agreement. And if you're interested, you could read that, I suppose. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the JDK X64 installation, because I'm running a 64-bit operating system at the moment. Now, fortunately, our downstream is pretty nice. Business class internet. And Oracle is pretty fast too, so won't have to pause the video for this download to complete. I seriously wasn't kidding about anything being installed in this computer. I have my recording software, and that's about it, really.
And Windows.
Yeah, and Windows. Which, it's always fun installing Windows. It's my favorite thing to do, by the way. Especially the updating part. Alright, so let's go ahead and click on the executable. You might want to pause the video if you haven't finished installing this, or you might want to skip ahead if you've already installed a JDK, or specifically JDK 7. So let's go ahead and hit next. We want the development tools, of course, source code, sure, and we also want a JRE. I especially want a JRE because I don't have a JRE installed at all, which you likely do. The JRE is the Java runtime, but like I said before, the JDK includes the JRE. You need the JRE to run Java, and you need the JDK to compile Java. That's basically the relationship between the two. So we're just going to sit here and install the JRE 7.
I know I've got it because Java always tells me I have it.
Yes. I'll tell you to update. It's the most annoying thing ever. I'm going to go ahead and close out of that, and I assume it's installed. So yay for that. So I'll close out. You might want to make note of where you installed to. Now, I kept the defaults. The default for me, since I'm on a 64-bit operating system, is going to be under Program Files, Java, and then I have my JDK 1.7 right here. So that's the default right there. Okay. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go. Now, the actual URL is pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to type it into the address bar right here, or you could just search Google for Android Studio. I'm going to type in developer.android.com SDK /SDK. Hit enter. And there we go. We have a download link for Android Studio. So make sure to hop over to here and go ahead and click on Download Android Studio and accept another license agreement.
Which we, of course, read.
Yeah, I read all my license agreements. They're really fun to read.
I've never missed one.
Yeah.
Ever.
It's my favorite thing. It's like installing new software. It's my favorite. This thing I look forward to. It's not the software itself. It's the EULA.
No, the software is no fun. You already know what's going to happen there.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is going to take a little bit of time, so I think I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while this downloads.
That is a fine plan.
Yeah, you see it's a little bit larger than the JDK there, totaling in at 817 megs. But fortunately, we're in 2015, and that only takes 1 minute to do. So we'll be right back. All right, so we just got Android Studio downloaded. So let's go ahead and click on the exe. Do many people pronounce it exe? Like, I sometimes do, but I usually say exe. I don't know.
I have never heard anybody say exe.
Really? I've heard a couple people say it. All right, so we're going to fast forward through the first page. Now, the second page, we're going to see we have Android Studio, Android SDK, Android Virtual Device, and the Intel Haxum driver. So that's actually really cool. Well, the first time when I installed Android Studio, it didn't include all this stuff. I mean, it would be really cool if the Intel Haxum driver actually was stable on Windows. Hint, hint, Intel, if you're listening. But since we're not going to be using the Android Virtual Device, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck both of these. But make sure that I install the Android SDK, which I haven't installed. So the Android SDK is not on my computer, so we're going to install it through this installer. And again, you'll see the Android SDK, the description is the collection of Android platform APIs, tools, and utilities enables you to debug, profile, and compile your app. Now, if you're interested in using the Android Virtual Device or the Haxum driver, I would recommend installing both of these things. If you are wanting to use Genymotion, which I highly recommend, then go ahead and just grab the Android SDK. If you already have the Android SDK installed, uncheck this because you'll be asked later to locate your current installation of the Android SDK. I do not recommend people having multiple copies of the Android SDK on their computers because that gets really, really confusing. So if you have the Android SDK, uncheck that. If you don't, make sure it's checked. Otherwise, if you don't end up with an Android SDK one way or the other, you won't be able to write Android code. So let's go ahead and hit next. Let's agree to the third EULA of the day. And so we see here that it's saying Android SDK install location. So I'm personally not a big fan of that location, so I'm going to change it real fast. I'm going to create a new folder in my... there we go. I'm going to go ahead and change it to something that isn't in my app data folder. The reason I'm changing it to somewhere that it isn't in my app data folder is because the Android SDK is something that we're going to have to refer to quite often when wanting to do things like access ADB, which we'll talk about later, of course, and other Android-y things. So I prefer it to be in a more global location on my computer and not in my local app data folder, which just too many clicks to get to for my taste. Anyway, you can put it wherever you want. I recommend somewhere that's easy to get to, however. So I'm going to hit next, and I'll hit install. And then this will probably complete pretty quickly, so I won't worry about pausing the video. Instead, I'll just fill the video up with words by saying things like this. And
You need more words than that.
yeah, I do. Actually, I might have to pause the video because it's extracting the Android SDK.
Oh, yeah, we should do that then.
Yeah, okay. We'll be back here in a minute. Alrighty, now that that is done, let's go ahead and hit next. And let's go ahead and hit finish. We're not going to be doing anything in Android Studio, but I do want to get a first launch out of the way, just in case there's anything I'm forgetting. So we're launching Android Studio now, and I'm going to go ahead and select that I do not have a previous version of Android Studio at the moment. So I'll hit OK. And we'll go ahead and just let it launch, see if it asks us to do anything else. Just making sure the SDK is up to date. And we should be good. One thing I will do with Android Studio... Now, I'll do it in the next video, just in case somebody skipped this video because they already had all this stuff installed. We'll go ahead and do some basic configuration of Android Studio in the next video when we launch it. But let's go ahead and close that out, because we are done with Android Studio for now. Alright, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and download Getymotion, the last thing that we need in order to get our development environment set up. So, the way this is spelled is Geny motion.com. So just type that into your address bar, and you will be presented with the Getymotion website. So, let's go ahead and hit the Get Getymotion button. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit download on this. We have a license, but it's something that you enter after downloading it. So what you want to do is, remember, you go ahead and hit Getymotion, go down to free and hit download, and then scroll down and find the download link wherever it's hiding. That's the tiny one, Get Getymotion. There's also an option for getting Getymotion without VirtualBox. Now, seeing as I don't have anything installed in this computer, I'll want to get the other version, the version that contains VirtualBox. However, if you already have a VirtualBox instance that you're wanting to use, I do believe the Getymotion installer will allow you to specify it. So if you do have VirtualBox already installed, you might want to get Getymotion without VirtualBox. We'll go ahead and get Getymotion. And it wants me to go ahead and have a Getymotion account. So in order to do this, I'm going to bring this off screen real fast. And after I go ahead and log in, it will start the download for me. So all I did was I logged into my account, started the download. If you don't have an account, you want to go ahead and register. It's pretty straightforward, free, simple, just requires an email address sort of registration. So now that we have the installer, let's accept our fourth EULA for the day. Or not. Unless I skipped it somehow. Because I was clicking through too fast. I don't know. Either way, it's installing. It seems to be installing pretty quickly too, so I'll just try to entertain you guys for the brief moment we have left here.
Go find the EULA and read it.
Yeah. that'd be awesome. Also, it's going to ask me to install VirtualBox because I chose the edition that came with it, so we'll skip through that. Let's go ahead and install all that awesome stuff. So I hit next. I don't care about shortcuts, whatever. Warning, restart your network connection. Temporarily disconnect you from the network. All right, goodbye, Steve.
Awesome.
All right. Let's see if I have an internet connection back.
Sure.
Oh, so that was pretty quick. All right, so I'm going to uncheck Start Oracle VM VirtualBox after installation, because we don't actually need to launch VirtualBox. And you'll see that in a moment. So instead, I'm just going to hit here with Launch Getymotion and hit Finish. Okay, so I'll close out of Chrome, and it's going to ask me, you do not have a virtual device yet. Do you want to add a new one? So let's go ahead through the process of creating our virtual device that we're going to be using throughout the course, at least one of them, because a little bit later we're going to create a new one. Now remember, Getymotion is kind of a manager for Android images that are compiled for x86, and B, an interface that wraps around the interface of VirtualBox. So let's go ahead and select Yes to create a device. And it's wanting me to sign in again, so I'll be right back. And now I'm signed in using my account. So now that I've done that, let's go ahead and look at what we're going to be using. Now, I want to go ahead and I want to use 4.4.4. That's going to be the device that we're going to be primarily working against. We could certainly go ahead and work on Android 5, Lollipop, but we're going to be focusing on KitKat. And the reason for that is KitKat has the largest market share and will for quite some time. The Lollipop adoption rate actually happens to be quite low, sadly. But even if it was high, when working with Android, you want to make sure that your software works on a large range of devices that are out there. And right now, 4.4.4, well, 4.4.1 to 4.4.4 are primarily what people are using. I believe the figures at like 70-80% of all Android devices are between 4.4.1 and 4.4.4. So that's mostly what we're going to be targeting. Now, of course, we are going to be writing code cognizant of the fact that Lollipop exists, and we're going to be using some new features that the SDK is going to give us due to Lollipop's existence. But for the actual device that we're going to be using, it's going to be 4.4.4, just because that's such a representative device. You'll also notice this weird thing right here, API 19. We're going to be talking about what API levels are in a later video. Now, the device I want to use is I want to grab a Google Nexus 5. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to click on it, and I'm going to hit Next. And then I'm going to name it, I'm just going to name it Google Nexus 5. Just chop off the rest of that stuff. You can name it whatever you want. And I'll hit Next. And now it's going to download even more stuff, which is super fun. Downloading stuff is my favorite thing to do.
I thought it was reading EULAs.
It's second favorite thing to do. Because after I download the stuff, I get to read the EULA.
Ah.
Yeah. And I ran out of words again.
Yeah, that happens.
See, this progress bar that Genymotion uses really irritates me because I can't tell if it's a white bit scrolling past or a black bit scrolling past. It's like an optical illusion.
I thought you were going to launch into progress bars for a second.
Okay, so the virtual device has been created successfully, so we'll go ahead and finish that. Now, here's an important bit. I'm going to hit this little tool icon to make sure a couple things are set properly. Now, first of all, I want to make sure that it has between 2 to 4 processors. Otherwise, it's going to run very, very slowly. Second, I'm going to take the base memory down to 1024, so 1 gig. Now, the reason for this is since we're going to be running a lot of software while we develop, and we'll want to be able to launch multiple multiple virtual devices, as well as Android Studio itself and all of that stuff, I want to make sure that I don't eat up all my memory with my virtual devices. Now, 1 gig is plenty for what we're doing. If you have an app that requires more than 1 gig to work, well, then you're doing stuff very wrong. So since we're only going to be using these virtual devices to use one app at a time, I'm just going to plop this down to 1 gig. That should be more than enough. But again, make sure that you have 4 processors. If you only have a dual-core processor, I would select 2 here. But since I have a quad-core multi-thread or hyper-threaded processor, I'm going to select 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And let's go ahead and start it just to make sure it's going to work. Because I can't remember if I disabled... See that progress bar? See, look, you can't tell if it's a white thing scrolling across or a black thing scrolling across. Anyway, off video, I'm also going to put in my license key for Genymotion because we did purchase it. I highly recommend it. It's a very nice piece of software. It does do some weird things every now and then. Like occasionally, it'll like turn my Android device into some sort of weird phone tablet hybrid thing, and I have to delete and recreate it. But that's really not a big deal, and it's 1,000 times faster than the Android emulator supplied by the SDK, and it's probably 100 times faster and more stable than the Haxum driver provided by Intel.
It was also the best one at running like multiples of itself, wasn't it? Where you had 2 or 3 devices going.
There's another thing called BlueStacks, but it isn't designed to run multiple copies at the same time, and it isn't configurable for screen dimensions and all that fun stuff. Great for what it's useful for, which is running Android apps on your PC, not so great for development. This is specifically designed for development, which gives us a lot of great features to use. Anyway, we have a fully running instance, go away, of Android 4.4.4. So that's awesome stuff and things. I think that pretty much wraps up all of the installation that we needed to get taken care of. I hope we didn't bore you guys a whole lot, but I wanted to make sure that there was nothing I was missing. Now, hopefully when we actually go into Android Studio in the next video, there will still be nothing that I missed, but there might be. So if you open up Android Studio and everything just explodes, just go to the next video because I'm about to open up Android Studio, and if everything explodes, I'll show you guys how to fix it. All right, guys. I think that wraps up this video. I hope you guys had a awesome time watching us accept EULAs.
It'll be great in the next one.
All right. See you.